Karen slapped my autistic brother. Didn't know my mom's a federal judge. It was supposed to be a relaxing Saturday. I had promised my younger brother Liam a trip to the mall's food court after his occupational therapy session, and we'd both been looking forward to it all week. Liam, 12 years old and on the autism spectrum, had worked especially hard during his sessions lately, and this little reward, a chocolate-dipped cone from the ice cream stand he loved, was something that always lit up his face. As his older sibling, I always tried to carve out time for moments like this, not only to give him joy, but also to offer him a sense of normalcy in a world that didn't always understand him. He deserved that much. So we went hand in hand, as we always did when things felt overwhelming for him. We strolled through the mall, the bustling noise dulled by his noise-canceling headphones, and made our way to the food court where the smell of pretzels, popcorn, and burgers filled the air. It was fairly busy that day. The tables were mostly full, families eating together, teenagers glued to their phones, and small kids running around with sticky hands. Liam was in good spirits, flapping his hands with excitement as he spotted the familiar Happy Cow ice cream logo above the stall. He let out a soft hum and smiled widely, his way of showing happiness. I stood in line with him, gently holding his shoulder to keep him grounded, while he kept making the little clicking noises he often did when overstimulated. A few people noticed, but most, thankfully, minded their business. That was until she showed up. She came from the other direction, dressed in a leopard print blouse and pushing a designer purse-filled cart with no child in sight. She looked to be in her 50s, with sharp eyebrows drawn far too high and a self-important air that floated around her like stale perfume. She paused when she saw Liam, who had just received his cone and was now sitting at the bench, happily licking it and looking around the food court with pure joy on his face. I caught the moment her eyes landed on him. Her lip curled slightly like she smelled something sour. At first I thought maybe she was just having a bad day, so I ignored it, but then she started walking toward us, slowly, purposefully. Her heels clicked like a metronome of malice. I didn't think much of it until I heard her say it, loudly, with no shame or filter, like we were invisible. "Excuse me," she sneered, eyes narrowing at Liam. "Can you tell your brother to stop making those weird faces? It's disturbing." I froze for a second, not sure if I heard her right. Liam was still enjoying his cone, now gently rocking back and forth as he savored each bite, completely unaware of the confrontation brewing beside him. I turned toward her, confused, then angry. "He's autistic," I said, my voice calm but firm. "He's just happy. He's not doing anything wrong." She scoffed. "Well, then maybe people like that shouldn't be brought out in public if they can't act normal." My jaw dropped. I stood up fully, positioning myself slightly in front of Liam now. "Ma'am, he's not bothering anyone. Please walk away." Her eyes flared as if I had personally insulted her family name. She took a step closer, her tone growing louder to draw attention. "I have every right to eat in peace without some freak making faces at me," she barked. People were beginning to look now. Some took out phones, some whispered. I was about to respond when it happened. In one sudden motion, without warning, she reached over and slapped Liam's ice cream cone clean out of his hands. The force caused some of the ice cream to splatter on his shirt, and his entire body jolted from the shock. He looked up at her, stunned, eyes beginning to brim with tears as he tried to understand what just happened. He didn't cry out, he rarely did, but his breathing grew short, his hands trembling as he wrapped his arms around his stomach, rocking faster now, overwhelmed and spiraling. And then, without a trace of remorse, she slapped him across the cheek. I screamed. It was instinctive, raw, loud, filled with disbelief. People around us gasped. Someone shouted, "Did she just hit that kid?" Security was already heading toward us, drawn by the sudden chaos and the noise. I rushed to Liam, crouched down in front of him, and gently held his arms, whispering calming phrases I'd memorized through years of therapy sessions. "You're safe. You're okay. Breathe with me." He wouldn't make eye contact, but he tried to mimic my breathing, short and shaky. I could see the redness blooming on his cheek where her hand had struck him. My own hands trembled with rage. By the time security reached us, Cairn was already on the defensive. "He came at me," she yelled, pointing at Liam, who was still crouched, rocking, silently crying. "He was making creepy faces and then tried to grab me. I was protecting myself." It was a blatant lie, one everyone nearby knew wasn't true. I looked up at the guards, my voice cracked but clear. "She hit my brother. He has autism. He was just sitting here." The head of security, a man in his 30s with a tired expression, asked to see surveillance footage immediately. Several bystanders offered their own recordings and statements, one woman even saying, "I saw the whole thing. That kid didn't do anything. She attacked him." Karen crossed her arms, scoffing again as if she couldn't believe she was being questioned. "This is absurd," she muttered. "People like that shouldn't be out here making others uncomfortable." One of the security guards visibly winced at her words. I had already taken out my phone and dialed Mom. My voice shook as I gave her the rundown, barely holding back tears. "She hit Liam, Mom. She slapped him. Please come fast." Her voice, always calm under pressure, responded with quiet fire. "I'm on my way. Stay with him. Do not let them leave." Karen, still delusional, had the gall to sit down at a nearby table like nothing had happened. Security kept her seated while waiting for law enforcement. Liam, still shaken, clung to my side as I slowly helped him breathe through the panic. He was starting to regulate again, thanks to the familiar presence of my voice and hands. But inside, my blood boiled. I didn't care who this woman thought she was. She had crossed a line that could not be undone. And she had no idea who was coming to confront her next. By the time Mom arrived at the mall, the atmosphere had shifted. Karen's smug demeanor hadn't waned much. If anything, it had grown bolder as the minutes dragged on. She sat at the security station with her legs crossed, one hand drumming against the armrest of her chair and the other holding her phone, taking a call in an exaggerated tone about how she was being harassed by delinquents and falsely accused. Her voice carried through the corridor like nails on a chalkboard. I stayed seated beside Liam, gently stroking his back as he calmed down. His breathing had steadied, but he still wouldn't speak or make eye contact, and his hands remained tightly gripped around the frayed ends of his jacket sleeves. I felt a cold rage stirring in my chest. The image of that slap, of that arrogant, entitled woman striking my innocent brother, looped endlessly in my mind. I had texted Mom the exact location, and I knew from her short, controlled responses that she was on a warpath. Still, nothing prepared me for the sight of her walking into the room. She entered not like a furious mother, but like something sharper, heavier, like a presence that reshaped the very air. She wore her usual slate-gray blazer, crisp and pressed, with a white blouse beneath and dark slacks. Her hair was tied back in a severe bun, not a strand out of place. Her heels clicked against the tiled floor in steady rhythm, not unlike the way Karen's had earlier, but where Karen sounded like arrogance, Mom sounded like judgment. Her face didn't betray a single emotion, no tears, no trembling lips, just that quiet, commanding calm that could stop grown men mid-sentence in courtrooms. The moment she stepped inside, security stood a little straighter, and even the manager who'd been trying to placate Karen took a step back. Karen herself looked up, annoyance flickering in her eyes before curiosity took over. She clearly didn't recognize who she was dealing with. Not yet. "Which one of you is in charge?" Mom asked, voice low and even. The head of mall security stepped forward and extended a hand. "Ma'am, I'm Scott, head of security. We've isolated the footage and gathered witness statements. We also called the police. They should be here soon." She gave a curt nod, accepting the handshake, but her eyes were already on Liam. She walked to us, crouched beside him, and placed a hand on his knee. "Liam, sweetheart," she said softly, "I'm here. Are you okay?" He didn't speak, but his head dipped the smallest bit in her direction. That was enough. She stood, turned, and faced Karen. "I was told you struck my son," Mom said, her voice now carrying the weight of a courtroom. Karen blinked, gave a dismissive wave of her hand, and scoffed. "Oh, you're the mother. Maybe you should teach your kid not to act like some kind of freak in public." He was making faces at me. I felt threatened. Her tone was laced with that patronizing entitlement, the kind that reeked of someone who thought they'd never be held accountable. I saw Mom's eyes narrow, not dramatically, but just enough to indicate the first crack in her composure. She took a slow breath, then reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She opened it, flipped it, and held up a shiny federal ID badge. There was a long silence. "I'm Judge Camille Ortega," she said, coldly and clearly. "Federal bench, appointed in 2016, and you just committed assault against a minor with a documented disability. You are going to face real legal consequences." Karen's face twisted into something grotesque, shock and disbelief warring for dominance. "Wait, what? You're joking," she muttered, her voice suddenly smaller. "This is some kind of intimidation tactic. I'll sue you for threatening me." I didn't know he was, but she stopped herself before saying something worse. The shift in her tone was sharp, like a balloon popping. She sat straighter in her chair, suddenly unsure of herself. "Mom didn't flinch. You had every opportunity to stop. My child was sitting peacefully. You were told he is autistic, and still you hit him. That's not a misunderstanding, that's battery." Karen tried to laugh, but it came out cracked and dry. "Battery? He didn't even cry. I barely touched him." The security footage had already been reviewed. Mom turned to the guard. "I'd like to see the video if you don't mind." Scott nodded and led her to the monitor. I stayed with Liam, but I watched from the side as she stood in front of the screen, arms folded. They played it back slowly. The angle showed everything. Karen stepping forward, knocking the cone away, and then, with an open palm, slapping Liam's cheek hard enough for his head to jolt. There were gasps in the security office. A female employee who had been reviewing the footage silently whispered, "My God." Karen stood now, visibly shaking. "Okay, look, I didn't mean to actually hurt anyone. I was just trying to scare him off. He was looking at me weird." "He was eating ice cream," Mom said without turning. "You slapped a child eating ice cream." Her voice was filled with a kind of sadness, not pity but disgust, like she couldn't comprehend how someone could fall so low and feel so right doing it. The door opened then, and two uniformed police officers stepped inside. One of them, an older man with graying temples, greeted the staff before turning to the room. "We got a call about an assault. Who filed the report?" "I did," said Mom, raising her hand, then gestured toward Karen. "That woman assaulted my son, who is on the autism spectrum. We have security footage, witnesses, and physical evidence." The officers looked between them, then stepped over to review the monitor. Karen stood up, tried to protest. "This is insane. You're all treating me like a criminal over a brat who doesn't know how to behave." But it was too late. The evidence spoke for itself. The officer turned and asked her to place her hands behind her back. Her voice turned shrill. "You can't do this. I didn't know. This is crazy." "You'll have a chance to explain everything to a judge," the officer said simply. "For now, we're detaining you for assaulting a minor." They cuffed her. The room went quiet. She looked to each face for some flicker of sympathy. She found none. Liam had watched all of this from his seat. As Karen was escorted out, still whining and threatening legal action against everyone in sight, he looked up at me and whispered, "Is it over?" I nodded, holding his hand. "Yeah, buddy, she's not going to hurt you again." Mom walked over and sat beside him, wrapping her arms around both of us. For a long time, we didn't say anything. We just sat there in silence as the weight of the moment settled. But in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet, because soon Karen would have to answer not just to us but to the law, and this time the courtroom wouldn't be kind. The days that followed the incident at the mall moved with a strange rhythm, slow, tense, and threaded with a quiet, unspoken rage that hovered over our home. Liam, though physically unharmed, had retreated into a shell he hadn't crawled into in years. The trust he had built with the world, fragile and painstakingly nurtured through years of therapy, was shattered in a single blow. He barely spoke unless prompted, avoided eye contact even with Mom and me, and spent much of his time curled up on the couch with his weighted blanket and noise-canceling headphones. The sparkle that usually danced in his eyes when he played with his Lego sets or lined up his favorite animal figurines had dimmed. Watching him like that made something inside me ache in a way I couldn't put into words. Every time I saw that fatting bruise on his cheek, it reignited the fire in my chest. What made it worse was knowing that Karen had gone home that day after being released on bail, her smug face flashing through my mind like a grotesque phantom, untouched by remorse, and likely already rewriting the narrative in her own delusional favor. Mom, however, was anything but idle. As a federal judge, she knew the importance of patience and process, but when it came to protecting her children, she moved with quiet fury. She filed formal charges immediately, reaching out to the district attorney's office and providing every piece of evidence collected: security footage, written statements from multiple eyewitnesses, and even footage from a few bystanders who had caught the slap on their phones. The video had by then begun circulating online after someone anonymously uploaded it. Within hours, it had gained traction. Comment sections overflowed with outrage. People were stunned at the audacity, the cruelty, and the sheer lack of humanity shown by Karen. The public backlash was swift and fierce. Her face became a meme. Her name trended on social media platforms, and with every share came more stories. Allegations from retail workers, servers, and even neighbors who claimed this wasn't the first time she had lashed out at someone vulnerable. Karen's carefully curated life began to unravel. Her employer, a mid-sized real estate company where she served as a regional manager, placed her on indefinite suspension pending the legal outcome. Local news picked up the story and ran it in the evening segment, the footage blurring Liam's face but not hers. Reporters camped outside our house for a day or two before Mom issued a calm but firm statement declining interviews and reminding the press that this was about justice, not spectacle. She didn't want Liam turned into a public symbol. He was a boy, a child, not a cause. Still, there was no hiding from the fact that this case had touched a nerve, both locally and nationally. It was no longer just about a slap in a mall food court. It had become a conversation about ableism, entitlement, and what happens when those in positions of privilege believe they are untouchable. The case moved faster than expected, likely pushed by both public scrutiny and Mom's quiet influence within the legal system. Karen was officially charged with assault of a minor, and more significantly, a hate crime enhancement due to Liam's disability status. That charge alone carried serious weight. Her attorney, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, requested a plea deal early on, hoping to sweep the matter under the rug with a public apology and a small fine. The DA refused. The evidence was overwhelming. The public eye was unblinking, and Mom made it clear that anything less than real accountability would be a betrayal of every parent whose child had ever been treated as less than human. What struck me during this time was how Mom remained so composed. At home, she was gentle, speaking softly to Liam even when he didn't respond. She prepared his favorite meals, encouraged his routines, and made space for silence without ever pressuring him to be okay before he was ready. But behind closed doors, when the phone calls started and meetings were held, she transformed into someone else entirely, precise, firm, unstoppable. I listened once from the hallway as she spoke to a colleague who had offered to help push the case along. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about sending a message that children like my son deserve to exist in public without fear, that hitting someone because they make you uncomfortable is not just wrong, it's criminal." I had never heard her voice tremble before, but it did just barely on that last word. Karen, of course, doubled down in her own special way. Her lawyer released a statement saying she was deeply sorry for the misunderstanding and that she never intended harm, attempting to spin the narrative as one of confusion and emotional overreaction. She even filmed a video where she read a statement from a printed page, claiming she grew up in a different time and wasn't fully educated on neurodiverse behaviors. The internet didn't buy it. Commenters tore it apart, noting how she never once addressed Liam by name, nor did she acknowledge striking him. It was the kind of empty apology you give when your PR rep tells you to save your career, not because you actually feel anything. And it didn't work. Her company officially terminated her. Her homeowners association began proceedings to remove her from the board, and still, she refused to plead guilty. We received the court summons a few weeks later. A preliminary hearing would be held, followed by a trial if necessary. Liam wouldn't have to appear in person unless absolutely required, which was a relief. Mom made sure of that, but she warned me that the road ahead would be uncomfortable. Karen had the right to defend herself, and that meant they'd try to argue intent, provoke loopholes, and downplay everything. It wouldn't be easy. I remember sitting at the kitchen table staring at the court documents when Mom placed a hand on mine. "You were brave," she said. "You protected your brother. I want you to remember that. Whatever happens next, we don't let them forget who the real victim is here." That night I found Liam sitting alone in his room, staring at his Lego city on the floor, untouched for days. I sat beside him, picking up a little plastic fire truck and moving it along the miniature street. After a while he glanced at me and asked, "Do I have to go back to that place?" I shook my head. "No, not unless you want to." He thought for a moment and then quietly whispered, "Good." It was the first word he'd said to me all day. And it felt like a small victory in a war we hadn't yet finished fighting. The courthouse had always been a place of cold architecture and colder silences, but on the day of Karen's preliminary hearing, it seemed to thrum with an unnatural energy. The marble floors echoed with every step, every whispered conversation bouncing off the high ceilings, every glance longer than it needed to be. It was the kind of day where even time seemed to hesitate, unsure of what was about to unfold. We arrived early, not because we needed to, but because Mom always did. Punctuality, she believed, wasn't just courtesy, it was control. She wore her courtroom face, calm, unreadable, a mask forged over years of high-pressure rulings and calculated arguments. But I could tell by the way her hand lingered on Liam's shoulder just a second longer that her restraint was just that, a deliberate holding back of something fiercer, something maternal and primal that the robe of a federal judge could only barely contain. Liam stayed home, of course, under the care of our trusted neighbor, Mrs. Hill, who had known him since he was in diapers. He still wasn't ready to step foot into loud public spaces, let alone a courthouse filled with strangers dissecting his trauma. Mom had ensured he was represented in every way possible through documentation, medical reports, and recorded statements. She wanted to be there for him in every sense, even if he wasn't sitting on the witness stand. I, on the other hand, sat beside her in the gallery, fingers twitching in my lap, trying to keep my rage from boiling over. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my head, Karen's hand, the ice cream on the ground, Liam's trembling breaths. Even now, weeks later, it felt fresh, like a wound that hadn't scabbed over yet. Karen entered the courtroom with the same faux confidence she had in the security office the day it all went down. She wore a navy blazer and a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her lawyer trailed beside her, a shorter man with a permanent frown and a stack of folders in his arms. She didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the crowd, but there was a tightness in the way her hands clutched the edges of her handbag that betrayed her nerves. Perhaps she thought her apologies and PR videos had softened the blow, that this would be another instance where she could manipulate the narrative, spin herself into a misunderstood victim. But the courtroom didn't play by the same rules as the internet, and this judge, unlike my mother, owed her no benefit of the doubt. The presiding judge, a stern woman named Judge Ramirez, took her seat, and the bailiff called the room to order. The air thickened with a hush, the kind that only comes right before a storm. Opening statements began, and Karen's lawyer immediately launched into a performance. He painted her as an upstanding citizen, a community volunteer, a woman with a clean record and a momentary lapse in judgment. He didn't mention Liam by name at first, only as the minor involved, as though reducing my brother to a vague footnote might somehow weaken the severity of her actions. When he finally did refer to Liam's autism, it was with the hesitant, uncomfortable tone of someone discussing a foreign language. He called it a complicating factor, implying that Karen couldn't have reasonably known how to react to his unusual behaviors. My fists clenched beneath the bench. The district attorney rose next and laid it all out with ruthless precision. The facts were crystal clear. Surveillance footage, eyewitness testimony, medical records, and above all, the intent. This wasn't an accident, this wasn't a reflex. It was a woman who had been informed explicitly that the boy she was confronting had a disability, and she chose violence anyway. She escalated not once but twice, striking a minor who had done nothing but exist in a way she didn't like. When the DA emphasized that Liam's actions, his flapping, his joyful expressions, were not disruptive, not threatening, but merely a child's happiness misinterpreted by cruelty, I saw Karen shift uncomfortably in her seat. It was the first crack in her armor. Then came the playback of the video. It had already been seen, dissected, and broadcast across social media, but now it played in the solemn hush of the courtroom. The screen was small, but the moment was massive. There was Liam smiling, licking his cone, rocking gently. Then Karen stepping into frame, swiping the ice cream away, and finally the slap. There was an audible gasp from someone in the back row. The judge didn't react, but her eyes sharpened as she watched. Karen couldn't bear to look at the screen. She stared downward, suddenly very interested in her folded hands. Afterward, a witness took the stand, a woman who'd been sitting 2 tables away that day. She spoke with calm conviction, describing everything she saw, how Karen had been aggressive from the start, how she'd ignored warnings, and how Liam had done absolutely nothing wrong. She recalled my screams, Liam's shocked silence, and how Karen had called him a freak even after being restrained by security. Her testimony was damning, not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. Karen's lawyer didn't even attempt to cross-examine her. Then came the final moment of the hearing, the determination of whether the case would go to full trial. The DA requested it, citing the severity and public interest. Karen's attorney tried weakly to argue for dismissal, citing character references and community ties. But Judge Ramirez cut him off, her tone cool and decisive. There is clear evidence of assault against a minor with a known disability. This is not a case of misunderstanding. This is a case of accountability. She confirmed the trial date and banged her gavel. As the room began to clear, Karen remained seated for a moment, as though reality had finally started to settle around her shoulders. Gone was the woman who sneered at my brother and dismissed his humanity. In her place was someone far less certain, far more exposed. She didn't look at us as she left, flanked by her lawyer. But I didn't need her to. The silence between us said enough. Outside the courtroom, I turned to Mom, expecting some sort of reaction, but she remained composed. Her eyes were tired, her hands clasped in front of her like she was holding back the weight of the world. "We're not done yet," she said softly, "but we're one step closer." I nodded, heart still racing, thoughts still swimming in a sea of emotions too tangled to name. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time since that horrible day in the food court, it felt like justice wasn't just a word, it was a direction, and we were finally walking toward it. The day of the trial arrived with an eerie stillness, as though the world itself held its breath. The courthouse parking lot was half full, but to me, it felt packed with anticipation, like the very walls inside had been waiting for this day as much as we had. The proceedings had drawn more attention than anyone initially expected. Local reporters were stationed outside, and a few spectators had shown up early, hopping for seats in the gallery. The case had become something of a symbol, a flashpoint in the broader conversation about entitlement, disability rights, and the consequences of unchecked aggression. But for us, for my family, this day was not about public image or making headlines. It was about Liam, about what had been done to him, about standing in front of the law and demanding it speak for those who couldn't always speak for themselves. Mom moved with that same quiet authority she always did, her posture unyielding, her face set with unwavering calm. She had not taken the bench that day. She had recused herself from all official capacity related to the case long before, refusing to use her position to influence the outcome. She insisted on doing this by the book. She came not as a judge, but as a mother, and I came beside her, walking with the weight of months of anger and pain pressing on my chest like a stone. Liam remained at home, safe and cared for, unaware of the final stage of the battle that had begun with a slap and a ruined cone of ice cream. Inside the courtroom, the mood was sober. Karen sat at the defense table in a black dress and pearls, a desperate attempt to maintain a facade of composure and respectability. Her skin was pale, her lips tight, her hair pulled back in a style that tried to whisper dignified but screamed fragile. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. Not mine. Not Mom's. Not even her lawyer's. That steely defiance she had clung to in the early days had crumbled. The courtroom had a way of stripping people down, of forcing them to face the ugly reflections they tried so hard to avoid. Her lawyer looked exhausted, his face flushed, his folders thicker now with counterarguments and appeals than with any real hope. The prosecution opened with strength. The district attorney spoke plainly, outlining Karen's deliberate escalation, the warning she had received, and her violent choice to ignore it. He emphasized Liam's vulnerability, the complete lack of provocation, and the clear presence of bias in her words and actions. He laid out the law regarding hate crimes and assault against a minor with a disability, underscoring the fact that justice did not bend for those who found difference uncomfortable. Then came the witness testimonies again, consistent and damning. Mall employees, bystanders, even a child psychologist who explained Liam's behaviors and how an encounter like this could cause long-term trauma. Each word felt like a stone laid upon a foundation of truth, building a structure that could not be ignored. Karen's defense flailed in comparison. Her lawyer tried to depict her as overwhelmed, caught in a stressful moment, uneducated about autism, remorseful in hindsight. He brought up her community service history, her clean criminal record, even her supposed donations to disability charities since the incident. But it all rang hollow. The judge, another colleague of my mother, listened intently but remained unmoved. When it was Karen's turn to speak on her own behalf, she stood hesitantly, her voice shaky. She offered what she called an apology, though it landed more like a plea for leniency than any genuine expression of remorse. She repeated phrases that felt coached and clinical, like she was checking off boxes in a courtroom performance. I didn't know he was autistic. I was scared. I reacted poorly. I'm deeply sorry if I caused distress. The words were soft but sterile. There was no heart in them. No ownership, no grief for what she had done. The verdict didn't take long. The evidence was overwhelming, the intent clear, and the law explicit. The judge found Karen guilty on all charges, assault on a minor and the hate crime enhancement due to Liam's disability. The courtroom was silent as the words fell, heavy as iron. Karen's shoulders slumped. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she didn't respond. She simply stared straight ahead, as though finally realizing that her actions had led her to this very moment, and there was no charm or arrogance that could undo what had been done. The sentencing followed shortly. She was fined and ordered to complete a significant number of hours of community service, specifically at an autism support center chosen by the court. She was also given probation, mandatory diversity and sensitivity training, and a restraining order preventing her from coming near Liam or our family again. But the most surprising consequence, the one that silenced even the murmurs of the gallery, was the judge's final requirement. Karen was to appear at a local disability awareness event and, in front of attendees, publicly acknowledge her actions and what she had learned. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about confronting the impact of her choices and using her mistake as a lesson, not a shadow to hide from. After the gavel fell, after the room emptied, I found myself standing outside the courthouse under a wide blue sky, the air feeling lighter than it had in weeks. Mom stood beside me, her shoulders relaxed for the first time in what felt like forever. We didn't speak for a long while. There was nothing more to say. Justice had been served. Not perfectly, not in a way that erased the pain, but in a way that acknowledged it, validated it, and held someone accountable. When we returned home, Liam was in the living room sorting his animal figurines into rows. He looked up and smiled, small, quiet, but real. I walked over and sat beside him, picking up a plastic rhino and placing it in the wrong row just to see him correct me. He did with a giggle. That sound, that little burst of joy, was the final word in the story for me. The world could be unfair, brutal even, but moments like this reminded me that kindness, safety, and love could be reclaimed. One truth at a time. One verdict at a time, one gentle smile at a time.